Hello there, I'm Tommy, welcome to Blitz Transmissions, and in this video I'm going to be covering a topic that may come as a surprise to newer fans of the franchise about a fan favorite group of characters known as the Clone Troopers. I myself am a huge Clone Trooper fan. I was a kid that grew up with the 2003 and 2008 Clone Wars animated series, so I am a big fan of the characters, and I really love what they've done to them in the Clone Wars 2008 series to make them more personal and more individual, and I think a lot of other people resonate with that as well. Now, we all know about the current canon explanation in Star Wars, which is that the inhibitor chips, which were introduced in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, compel the Clone Troopers to do things like execute Order 66, and turn their backs on their Jedi generals. But before that, that was not the explanation at all for why the Clone Troopers executed Order 66. Now, I've got a few sources on this to kind of back up my statements that I'm making here. Now, the first source comes from Wikipedia, a fan-run website that pretty much covers anything and everything you could think of when it comes to Star Wars. Under the Legends tab of Order 66 for Wikipedia, they do make mention that the inhibitor chips did not have any effect on whether or not the Clone Troopers were going to execute Order 66. Now, a big one here for me, this is a game that I grew up with. This means a lot to me. This comes from the campaign, the 501st Journals, from the Star Wars Battlefront 2 2005 video game. In this campaign, there are cutscenes before and after each mission where Tamara Morrison himself voices a clone trooper from the 501st Legion going over his war stories from the Clone Wars. And there are several mentions throughout these different cutscenes that allude to the fact that clone troopers willingly followed Order 66 and even knew about it before the war even began. There are a couple voice lines in the cutscenes that have to do with the mission on Megiddo with Ki-Adi-Mundi that really jump out to me here. The first one before the mission starts being that Ki-Adi-Mundi was under the impression that the 501st Legion was sent to Megiddo to basically be backup for him in the losing battle. However, Tamara Morrison's character dictates that they were sent there by the Chancellor himself. I think this is a big key to kind of the old canon explanation for the Clone Troopers, being that Chancellor Palpatine himself was dispatching the 501st Legion on special missions under the guise that they were helping other units when really they were fulfilling objectives for the Chancellor's secret agenda. One quote that really jumps out to me here comes from the cutscene after the mission is over, where Tamara Morrison's clone trooper states, quote, "Suddenly we realized the Jedi could be fooled, and if they could be fooled, they could be killed." Now, there are several instances in this campaign where he talks about things in retrospect. However, this statement is made in the moment. It was the clones realized after the Megiddo mission, right after it happened, that if the Jedi could be fooled, they could be killed. Another voice line that really jumps out to me comes from after completing the Felucia mission with Aayla Secura, where you fight the Acklays and battle droids and things like that. Tamara Morrison's clone trooper narrates that Aayla Secura personally saw the 501st off the planet, congratulating them, telling them they were the bravest soldiers that she had ever fought with. Tamara Morrison's character does make mention that he hopes Ayla's death was quick beforehand, but after the mission he also says, quote, "It's a good thing we were wearing our helmets because none of us could bear to look her in the eye." Now, this to me translates as some sort of shame that these clone troopers have, like they can't take a compliment because they ultimately know what the outcome of Aayla is going to be. Again, this kind of harkens back to the clones always knowing that there was a contingency order where they were going to kill the Jedi. It's really quite interesting when you read into it a little bit deeper, and considering that this game came out the same year as the Revenge of the Sith movie means that this game was in development while Revenge of the Sith was in development. So obviously the creative teams were bouncing ideas off of each other and heard about Order 66 and had to humanize a clone trooper for their campaign. The last quote that I'm going to use here comes from the prelude to the Battle of Coruscant, aka the Order 66 mission itself in that video game. Tamara Morrison's character makes lots of comments about how the ride to Coruscant after they were discreetly dispatched by Palpatine was quiet. No one said a word, even, quote, private, traitorous thoughts being mentioned. This implies that the clone troopers were intent on killing the Jedi. Whether or not they were happy about it, that comes into question, which, again, this voice line does kind of tie into the inhibitor chips, which I'll get into later, how everything does kind of tie in. But again, we have this idea that the clone troopers knew this was coming and they're dreading it. And honestly, if we take a step back to Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, you kind of have a foreshadowing to the clone troopers being the cause of the Jedi's death. On Kamino, when Lama Su is showing Obi-Wan the clone army for the first time, Lama Su says, quote, "They are totally obedient, taking any order without question." Now, Lama Su making this statement obviously predates any mention of an inhibitor chip. Obviously we can retrofit the inhibitor chip in with that line in the movie. However, this really fits in very well with the quotes that we have from the Battlefront 2 campaign. And coming in, we have a quote from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. The Revenge of the Sith novelization is a fantastic read, which I highly recommend reading yourself if you have not gotten into that book yet. There are a lot of important lore bits that did not make it into the final cut of the movie, and in my opinion, books just do a generally better job at getting a character's inner thoughts or having just a narrator explaining things to you rather than on a visual screen. So the quote from the Revenge of the Sith novelization goes, "War itself pours darkness into the Force, deepening the cloud that limits the Jedi. And the clones have no malice, no hatred, not the slightest ill intent that could give warning. They are only following orders." Now, obviously, we can kind of see where a lot of this came into what the current canon explanation is with, the good soldiers follow orders quote that we heard a lot in the Clone Wars within Seasons 6 and 7. But, again, this implies that the clone troopers were bred this way. They were made this way, and they get deeper into that with the inhibitor chips in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, but I will argue that not even that show always had inhibitor chips planned all along. We do see early mentions of the clones killing Jedi in the 2008 Clone Wars series, most namely a line coming from Season 2, Episode 8 of the Clone Wars called Brain Invaders. This is the episode where Ahsoka and Barriss are trapped on a Republic transport with a bunch of clones who have been infected by the Geonosian parasite worms. When the clones figure out how to trap Barriss Ophi, they have these brain worms kind of controlling their minds, so these brain worms then have full access to the conscience of the clones. And when they are about to infect Barriss with a parasite, and one of these clones says, quote, "If there's one thing we clones know, it's how to stop a Jedi." With this line, there's an implication that within every clone's brain, the clones know about Order 66 and what they would need to do to execute that order. However, in the expanded universe Now Legends explanation for this, Order 66 was just one of a series of contingency orders that were given to the clone troopers upon their programming when they were made. Now again, like I made mention before, the inhibitor chips being brought into Season 6 of the Clone Wars does work with a lot of the stuff I mentioned before. You just have added in that specifically the Kaminoans put in an organic chip that was foreign to the clone troopers being made, that was placed into their brains to make them and compel them to execute Order 66. Now you might be asking, why was this change made to canon? Because I'll be honest, I do prefer the current canon explanation over, yeah, they just were made to follow orders and be loyal no matter what. To be completely truthful, George Lucas has said himself that he did not see the clone troopers becoming as popular to the fans as they really became. So as time went on, obviously writing the Clone Wars series, they did things like give clone troopers more personality, give them more screen time, give them more individualism, beyond just your generic, like this one has a different haircut, this one's got a different quirk or a tattoo. They give these clone troopers more depth of character. And that all comes from the entire generation of fans that resonate so deeply with the clone troopers, that being mostly people my age who are in their mid to late 20s now. If it weren't for the Clone Wars series and the clone troopers as a group of characters becoming so popular with my generation of fans, I don't know that the inhibitor chips would have ever been introduced. But because the characters became so beloved, as minor as they were, I think George Lucas wanted to have a little bit more of a morally sound explanation for why they just decided to up and kill their Jedi generals that they built relationships with over the course of the 3 years of the Clone Wars. An entire generation of Star Wars fans kind of revitalized their interest in the franchise within the prequel era because they've attached themselves so fervently to the clone troopers. I'm one of them. I mean, the logo of this channel, the mascot of this channel, is a clone trooper from the Clone Wars. I honestly think that the introduction of the inhibitor ship as one of the best things to happen to the Star Wars canon as far as technically retcons go, because it gave us an entire series like The Bad Batch. We got to see more of Captain Rex's story in a show like Star Wars Rebels because of it. And we see the inhibitor chips brought up time and time again throughout newer Star Wars media to help bolster the gravity of that explanation. So yeah, I guess that's going to be your little history lesson in Star Wars lore. This is something that I don't really see get talked about a lot within the Star Wars fandom bubble. Again, it's not canon technically, so I can understand why it's not brought up much, but I would hate to see it kind of fade into obscurity completely, which is why I decided to sit down and make this video today. Let me know in the comments, do you prefer the current canon explanation with the introduction of the inhibitor chip, or do you prefer the explanation that was had prior with the clone troopers that they just always knew about Order 66 all along? Be sure to let me know, and if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe to Blitz Transmissions. I've got awesome Star Wars content coming out all the time. Make sure to check out my social media, all of which is linked in the description below. That's going to be all for this video, guys. I'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.